guys, welcome back to True Crime with Shannon, where I cover missing persons, unsolved cases, crime news, and more. Well, DNA found on the knife sheath found under the body of one of the murder victims in the Idaho 4 case is a statistical match to suspect Bryan Kohberger, who is being charged in the murders, according to documents the prosecutors have filed in the case. The DNA evidence came in a motion protective order that is being sought out by the prosecutors. They don't want to release this information regarding the investigative genetic genealogy used in the case to Kohberger's defense team.
We begin this morning with some brand new details in the Idaho college student murders. Accused killer Bryan Kohberger is a statistical match to DNA recovered from the knife sheath found at the crime scene. Now, that is according to some newly released court documents. A protective order was filed last week that expands on the initial probable cause affidavit. Now, we already knew that Kohberger's father was linked to the knife sheath. The FBI further compared DNA from the sheath to a cheek swab of the defendant and confirmed that it was a match. Now, these revelations come from a protective order filed by the state seeking to protect the identities of Bryan Kohberger's extended family. Many have said that DNA is what will convict the killer. The Gonsalves family attorney Shannon Gray previously spoke to Court TV about the importance of the knife sheath to this case. Take a look.
That was a pretty lengthy probable cause affidavit. It's one of the lengthiest ones I've ever seen. But I think they were very, they wanted to provide as much information as they could to establish probable cause in it. It laid out a little bit of the state's case, how they might proceed on the case at trial. But there's a lot of still other circumstantial evidence that will be gathered between now and the trial date. You still have 3 other crime scenes. You have his apartment, you have the car, you have his parents' house that all need to be processed for evidence of the crime, and then any other evidence that comes in between now and then. But the probable cause, I thought that, it was well done. I think the biggest piece of evidence that jumps out to you is the DNA evidence on the sheet. I think that's the one piece of evidence that will be hard to explain as a defense attorney on the case. So I think that's the biggest piece of evidence.
I agree. I think DNA is I don't know if it's possible, because I'm not an expert on DNA, obviously, but it's really hard to argue with DNA. That's why forensics and all that is so vital. And this revelation that Bryan Kohberger matches that sheath that was found on the bed next to Maddie and Kaylee, that's huge. That is huge.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about this, and I have a prop, and I can't underscore enough just how heavy this is. I have a K-bar knife here. This is the type of weapon that was used to kill those 4 beautiful college students. This is the sheath, and it was on this snap of the sheath. This snap right here that was swabbed, and that's where that little bit of a DNA profile began. So that's where it all started. Now, investigators didn't know whose DNA it was on the snap. They just were able to get somebody's DNA here. And as they continued investigating, they honed in on Bryan Kohberger. That is why investigators started going through the trash at the family home. And in going through the trash, they were able to get something to compare to that profile from the snap, right? And in doing that, they knew it was the son of Papa Kohberger, right? That's what they knew from this. It was the offspring of Papa Kohberger was found right here on this little teeny tiny snap.
That is amazing what technology can do in analyzing DNA. And I love that Court TV has this visual for us to see. I thought it was highly interesting to be able to actually see a K-bar knife just like the one that took the lives of these 4 college students. And I'm sure they're going to have, if they don't have the actual weapon, which they don't as far as I understand, besides the sheath, I'm sure they're going to have a very similar knife in court to show the jury.
Of this knife sheath left behind. The knife was not. I'm going to show you how big the knife is too. Wait till I pull this out and you see this. This is so heavy. I mean, look at this. Look how large this.
Can you imagine? I don't like knives. I barely like them to cut food and that sort of thing. And when I'm chopping stuff up, I'm super careful because I'm the type who cuts myself shaving in the shower. So I can't imagine this kind of a knife. This is a weapon used to hunt. And in this case, it was used to hunt these 4 young college students.
This turns my stomach. And this isn't the first time I've held this. I've held this previously in our newsroom. It's very heavy. The handle's very heavy. When you think about this being the murder weapon used, it turns your stomach. The sheer brutality of these homicides, each of those young people being stabbed multiple times with this K-bar knife. And I'm going to put it back in the sheath here as I continue talking and button up that snap. So once they knew it was Papa Kohberger's sons or offspring's DNA on this, that was a really great starting point. And that was in the original affidavit that we all read and were looking at. Police were able to take it a step further. There was a court order, and Bryan Kohberger had what's called a buccal swab taken. If you hear that, it's a cheek swab. They stick what looks like a Q-tip into the cheek, swab it around, and they're able to take that. Once he was arrested, they're able to do that per court order. And they did DNA test number 2. And this is why this is so important. With test number 2, they were able to confirm Kohberger's DNA with what was on this snap, and then be able to come to the conclusion that yes, it's Bryan Kohberger's DNA that's on that knife sheath that was left behind at the crime scene. This is huge. Let's talk more about this. I have 2.
That really is huge. With everything else that his team, his defense team, Kohberger's team wants to argue in this case as far as his vehicle, cameras, what have you. DNA is hard to argue. I mean, it's huge, and I have no idea, even remotely. I know they're going to have an argument to it, but how are they going to argue that Bryan Kohberger was not in that home with this knife that evening when these 4 college students were brutally murdered?
2 excellent attorneys on the program with me this morning in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, criminal defense attorney and former prosecuting attorney Sueann Robinson, and in East Lansing, Michigan, trial attorney Jamie White. Wonderful to see you both. Thanks so much for coming on the program today. For any doubters out there who were saying, oh, I don't know about this DNA, I don't know if it's Bryan Kohberger's, I don't understand this, the offspring of dad, this second DNA test seems to put to bed all of those doubts. Does it not? Sueann Robinson, I want to go to you first, please. Weigh in and tell us your thoughts on this new development, please.
I think this is a very important development because obviously it places him at the scene and it places his DNA on the sheath, which is arguably to be where the murder weapon was held. And so I think the most important thing for the state to show is that the initial DNA test is part of the steps in that process. Part of the process is initially testing the DNA, then doing the comparison, as you discussed, with the buccal swab from his cheek. And then once that was compared, then that's how they came to the conclusion that Bryan Kohberger was the person whose DNA was found. But I think it's going to be important for the prosecution to explain those steps to the jury. I think that the jury is always hungry and for DNA evidence, for scientific evidence, for evidence that they can look to say, this isn't testimony, this isn't something that we're speculating on, this is not something that we're having to apply our common sense to necessarily. This is a hard, concrete fact.
Right, Sue Ann. Well said. And it makes sense.
I agree with that attorney. I think she made some really good comments there, and not just the jury wants to hear all this stuff, but those of us following this case from the get-go, all of us true crime, we love to hear all this evidence and getting to understand the process to how they found this DNA and how they tested it and the entire procedure. I look forward to hearing about it myself. I really do.
When you think about it, because police get the profile initially from the snap, and then they go to the house where Kohberger is. He's their guy. They like him for these homicides. So they start digging through the trash. Well, that trash is shared. It's shared between Dad, Mom, and Kohberger. So they're getting something from that trash, not sure who it belongs to, somebody in the family. It makes sense that they would be able to say, offspring of Dad, that's whose DNA this is, and then confirm it by the cheek swab, the buccal swab with Kohberger once he was locked up and charged, and then say, okay, yeah, for sure, that's what was left behind. I'm going to pull this giant knife out. I mean, it is so heavy to hold. I can't imagine a homicide being committed with this knife, holding this. I mean, it's just incredible to me. And those poor young people stabbed to death. This left behind. Why was this left behind? I want to go back to the affidavit. It says, quote, the knife sheath was found on a bed next to the bodies of Madison and Kaylee. Remember, these were the roommates. They were sharing the bed together that night. Best of friends. The sheath was found face down, partially under both Madison's body and the comforter on the bed.
I've always thought that he left it by mistake. I mean, why would he leave evidence that would include his DNA behind? I mean, what an error. What a fatal error on his part.
Why was this left? This is a big thing to leave behind. Look how huge this is. Attorney Jamie White, let me go to you on this one. This is one of those stunning things. Somebody goes to do 4 homicides and they leave behind this with DNA. Do you think that's going to be a tough fact for prosecutors, or perhaps a helpful fact because we know we got the DNA on this?
Yeah, so I think that, what we're going to hear from the defense is that they're going to concede the DNA evidence. I agree with Sue Ann that there's going to be some challenges to the testing processes. We see this all the time, but the evidence is overwhelming. And, the science is so good now that even if it is a relative, it's very easy to distinguish who the actual contributor was. As far as the defense is concerned, their only reasonable, logical play at this point is to concede that the DNA was on the sheath, but in some fashion it came into the possession of some other individual. I don't believe that's a reasonable or rational explanation, but I think that's the only place they can go. As far as why the sheath is there, the thing that troubled me about this case early on, Julie, was 4 people murdered without much of a defense put up by anybody. And then there's a lot of reasons for that, but at the end of the day, you have to believe that somebody did something out of fear and ultimately led Mr. Kohberger to leave that sheath behind.
Yeah, that's got to be the only thing they're going to argue. They're probably going to argue that, Bryan had this knife. He had this knife and somebody stole it, somebody borrowed it, whatever. They're going to argue that that's how his DNA got on it. Of course, I think that's pretty weak, for sure. And yeah, otherwise there's really no arguing the DNA on the knife sheath that was found near the bodies of Madison and Kaylee.
Because to your point, no reasonable person would do that, in light of the fact that this was clearly a planned out home invasion, homicide, and other potential crimes.
Right, Jamie. Take it a step further. I keep thinking about this guy that we know was wearing gloves when he's back in PA, wearing gloves when he's touching his own trash. I guess the joke's on you, Bryan Kohberger, because they got your DNA and matched it to this knife at the crime scene. But I mean, he was being so careful wearing the gloves around, but leaving this behind. This is it's one of those things I wonder, Sue-Ann, was this guy so cocky that he might have done this on purpose, thinking I'll never get caught? Everybody says he was arrogant. He thought he knew it all. He was that kid in class. I'm sure you and Jamie had that person in class, in your law school class, who would think they knew the answers better than everybody, think they were smarter than everybody. They said that was this guy. And if he did do what police say he did and plotted this out and methodically was stalking these people and following them and going to the house and had made 12 previous trips to the house, you'd think he'd be more careful. Sue-Ann, last word here, please.
Yeah, I think there's always the theory and there's always the plan, and then there's actually in the heat of the moment when it's happening. To me, him leaving behind the sheath, or the idea that he left it behind, shows that obviously, as Jamie said, there was a moment where there was a chaotic scene where it wasn't probably going according to the way he planned and he lost track of the sheath. That's what it would demonstrate to me. If I was a juror, I would say there was obviously something, a moment or a span of time where there was a chaotic issue that took him off of his plan or caused him to leave it behind because things weren't going according to how he probably planned them out.
Mm-hmm. Right, Sue-Ann, right. You know, and I wonder also if he wore gloves when he allegedly committed these homicides. You know, police say he murdered these 4 people. I wonder if he had gloves on at the time, because the only place on this little tiny snap, which makes me wonder, you know, the way in which this was handled prior to it going to that home that night. And I have so many questions still, but this is a big piece of information.
Definitely, this is huge. And I just don't know how they're going to argue it beyond throwing some excuses at the jury and hoping something's going to stick. So I thought that was an excellent court TV piece. And that really, seeing the knife, even though it's not in, you know, your hands, but that's the closest I've seen such a knife, a K-bar knife. And, you know, that the way she described it and held it, that's a big thing. And I know in court, again, they're going to have that actual sheath, and I'm sure they're going to have a knife resembling what would be found in that sheath, a K-bar knife. And one more clip I wanted to play was with a criminologist that spoke with News Nation. It's a very good piece as well.
So joining us now for more insight is criminologist and author, Dr. Debbie Goodman. Dr. Goodman, always great to speak with you. So there's this new court filing. It outlines this protective order for how this DNA profiling was done, essentially attempting to protect the genealogical family tree used to pinpoint Kohberger as the suspect. So what does this tell you? Is this essentially a slam dunk for prosecutors who are saying, hey, we want to protect the rest of this family?
Right. Well, as always, Nicole, good afternoon and a pleasure to join you. This is such significant evidence and revelation, and your intro is spot on, because now we deal with data analytics, we deal with numerics, we deal with science. And we know that, unfortunately, in cases such as this, so tragic and heinous, individuals lie. If they're asked, did you commit a crime? Are you guilty, not guilty? Not guilty. So the process begins, and now the information is forthcoming. But when we talk about the numerics and the data analytics on what has just been revealed and disclosed to us, we're talking not million, not billion, not trillion, but octillion. I mean, that's just a numerical value that we don't even traditionally use, let's say, in mainstream society. But DNA, Nicole, does not lie. People lie. This is huge evidence. This is extremely significant for this prosecution in presenting his DNA at this crime scene. I think this individual, as smart as he thought he was, made a colossal mistake. This is the tipping point in this case.
All right, so Debbie, I read through these documents before we do these segments, come up with these questions, and you zeroed in on exactly what I did as well. That these documents say that when it does come to that DNA profile strain, it is 5.37 octillion more times to be seen if the defendant is the source. So again, this is a number we don't even refer to octillion because it's so great. Is there any chance, based on science, Kohberger is not the source of the DNA on that knife sheath?
As a criminologist, Nicole, I say absolutely not. This is the tipping point. This one piece of evidence, I know a lot of our viewers, our citizens who are following this closely are still wondering about the knife. Do we need the knife? What did he do with the knife? Has it been discarded? Does he have it? I think he has it, but I truly do not think we need the knife. This knife sheath, it's small, but beyond significant. It puts him right there at the crime scene. DNA doesn't lie.
We always find that, well, not always, but so many times we find that mistakes are made. And then, when it comes to science and tracking people down, obviously we know he is innocent until proven guilty. But based on the documents so far that have been released to the public that you have seen in this case, what is the most damning evidence right now against Kohberger? Is it this?
It is this, Nicole. It truly is. Again, I'm not quick to use terminology as slam dunk and sure thing. We're still daily taking a look at it all. But now when we look in totality, this becomes the focal point. This is the anchor of this case. It puts him right there at the crime scene. Yes, innocent until proven guilty, but how possibly can one, deflect away from this? There will be other things, of course, forthcoming. I think the digital evidence is also very significant here, even though, some may say, well, it's circumstantial. But again, in high-profile cases, murder cases, quadruple murder such as this, circumstantial evidence is key. We're going to find out forthcoming that there was communication, one-way communication, meaning he did reach out to two of these victims on social media. No response, no reply from them. It still shows affiliation, association, and selectivity. And we have his car in close proximity. We have the phone being pinged. All of this, Nicole, I think is going to be very important for this prosecution.
Absolutely. And again, 5.37 octillion times more likely to be the defendant's DNA on that sheath. All right. Dr. Debbie Goodman, always appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
So this, again, like they're all saying, this is big. This is huge. So, I think irregardless of what his defense team tries to argue for the reason why his DNA is on that knife sheath, I don't think it's like it's gonna work. You could have all these other questions and unsureties but the knife sheath DNA, is like I said, it's not a lie. So I definitely think this may be the smoking gun in this case. So what do you guys think? Do you think this DNA evidence is what's going to put the nail in Kohberger's coffin? Let me know what you think in the comments. And I'm going to look more into all this DNA stuff and see if I can speak with a criminologist or someone who's more expert in that, like a CSI. Again, I'm always interested in this stuff. So I do look forward to hearing a lot of this stuff during the trial for sure. All right, guys, thank you for checking out the channel. And do me a favor on your way out, if you haven't already, hit that thumbs up button for me. That like does help the algorithm and gets the videos out here. Hopefully other folks can see them. And if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, I would love it if you would. Just hit that and the notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. All right, I hope you have a great rest of the day. And most of all, stay safe.